Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time for Chain Breakers. Now, the Ethereum network was apparently the target of a coordinated attack, according to several analysts in the sphere. Now, following reports that some parity Ethereum nodes lost sync with the network. Joining us to break down what happened, or exactly what happened, is Aharon, a software developer at FlexDApps. Liam, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so first, break down for viewers exactly what happened with the attack.
Yeah, sure. So basically, last night on New Year's Eve, somebody exploited a bug in one of the Ethereum client implementations called Parity Ethereum. And what this exploit allowed the attacker to do was basically send Parity Ethereum nodes a malicious payload. And when the Parity Ethereum nodes received this payload, they, as you mentioned, they would just lose sync with the network.
Mm-hmm. And so what would be an attacker's motive here? Would there be any Ethereum to gain through this attack, or was it merely to cause destruction?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the attack didn't actually have a measurable impact on the network. And that's because Parity Ethereum nodes only account for about 20% of all of the Ethereum nodes. So it's hard to know what the attacker's motives would be. Usually when exploits like this are discovered, the attacker would responsibly, or whoever discovered the exploit would responsibly disclose it and receive the bounty. But instead, they just decided to use it, and it was patched, and there was no measurable impact. So it's difficult to know. Maybe they were expecting more disruption than occurred, but it's hard to say.
Is it possible that it was a competing node client, whether Geth, the largest node client, or even a smaller one looking to gain a bigger share of the Ethereum blockchain?
Possibly, but I would personally say the chances of that being the reason would be quite low. Just because, I mean, you know, the Ethereum community is quite strong. We don't really want to we don't really attack each other or do any of that sort of thing. It wouldn't make sense in my point of view for a competing client to pull this attack off.
Yeah, if the bug was causing parity nodes to become unsynced, why were there any parity nodes, or how could any of the parity nodes be actually synced? Why weren't all the parity nodes unsynced? Yeah,
so I don't know what the numbers were about how many parity nodes fell out of sync and how many kept in sync. Basically, the attacker would need to have a direct connection with a parity node to pull it out of sync. So if a parity node, or if the attacker didn't manage to connect with a parity node, then he wouldn't be able to attack it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a bigger picture look at this. You mentioned that it didn't really have a direct effect on the Ethereum network because only 20 or 22% at the time of attack was actually running this client. But what does this mean for Ethereum, as a whole, and potentially its upcoming hard fork, when we see that that it has 20%, that was the parity node, but Geth actually has the largest, I believe it's at around 70 or even more, 70%. What happens if something like this happens to the Geth node client?
Yeah, sure. So if an attack like this happened to a client like Geth, the effect would obviously be much larger. Obviously, Ethereum would not go down completely because Ethereum has multiple client node implementations running. So yeah, like bugs like this are not unique to Ethereum, and they can affect any blockchain really. Like even Bitcoin, who are notorious for having a stable code base, they've had several emergency upgrades to address critical bugs in the past. So it is definitely something that could happen. And if a similar attack did affect Geth, then I'm sure that the community would patch it quite quickly. And in the meantime, things would still continue running along just fine because there is this client diversity in the network.
But is there really that much client diversity, or even enough diversity? If Geth is running, at almost 75, 80%, is that too much centralization? If that goes down, then it lowers the bar for kind of what an attacker needs to do to really control the network. No?
Yeah, sure. Like it is definitely a point of weakness for the network. But it is almost just something that's inherent to blockchains at this early stage when there's not a lot of resources being dedicated to building clients. It is quite common for development and for usage to centralize around a particular client. Obviously, it's better if we can have more client diversity. But in most blockchains, even with Bitcoin, and they've suffered consequences for this as well, and they've recovered from it. Yeah, like these sorts of attacks can just happen.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, do you think that more development, instead of there's tons of development happening on the actual Ethereum blockchain, but since the client is pretty much how people or how nodes interact with their blockchain, do you feel that there should be more development money and more development time put towards these clients?
Yeah, personally, I think so. I mean, the only reason that a big contributor to the reason that Ethereum wasn't affected by yesterday's attack was because it does have client diversity, and so if there is a possibility that if we lose the client diversity, then it will become vulnerable, like other blockchains like Bitcoin, to these sorts of attacks. And so, yeah, like I think especially maybe the Ethereum Foundation. I don't know for sure. I'm not an expert in these matters, but it could be beneficial for them to maybe dedicate some funding to developers who are working on alternative clients to Geth. But yeah, I mean, this at the end of the day is an issue that can occur to any blockchain. It's something that we just have to deal with when it happens.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that Parity was actually very quick in putting out a patch for that bug, but there is talk that Parity actually wants to go decentralized themselves. They want to go over to DAO structure. How would that affect their ability to instantaneously or quickly react to hacks like these or bugs like these?
That's a very good point that you bring up, and one thing that I am concerned about is, as you mentioned, Parity, the company that currently oversees development of the Parity Ethereum client, announced last month that they were going to be stopping supporting the Parity Ethereum client, and that they would be handing over the responsibility of maintaining the client to a DAO, which would be managed by a bunch of just other companies in the Ethereum ecosystem. Now it's questionable how this will affect the future of the Parity Ethereum client, and if maybe if it becomes less reliable, then people will move more towards just Geth and will develop a monoculture. I hope this doesn't happen, and I hope that some people in the Ethereum community can start to fund development, maybe on Parity Ethereum, maybe on another alternative client, but that remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. And especially now with Ethereum, they have their hard fork coming up, or it might even happen yet. I haven't checked, but definitely they're moving.
I think it happened a few minutes ago.
It happened really a few minutes ago. Wow, incredible! And it went smoothly.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So they're marching towards, hopefully they've been saying it for already years now, a proof of stake, a consensus system. If they go to proof of stake, would that change at all, or how would that change node clients and how they interact with the blockchain?
Yeah, so migrating or putting proof of stake onto ETH1 has likely won't happen anymore, but instead development focus has moved towards ETH2, which will be a completely different system. Thankfully, with ETH2, there are multiple, I think there's like 3 or 4 well-funded companies working on their own client implementations for ETH2. So in the next couple of years when that, just in Q1 this year, we do expect to see phase 0 for ETH2 coming out. There will be multiple clients for that. But it will be some years before ETH2 is ready to completely replace ETH1. And hopefully in the meantime, while we kind of like wait for ETH2 to be completely ready, I do hope that we can keep some client diversity.
Mm-hmm. All right, very important as always that within the blockchain, one of the biggest pros is decentralization. It's one of the things that keeps it strong, and especially a strong community. People like you, Liam, thank you so much for continuing to support blockchains, its communities, and filling us in a little bit, on this story, on the background, on the background. Was that a cat over there?
That was a cat, yes. Yeah.
That was a cat. We'd like to thank the cat, too, for helping out in the decentralization of the community. Liam, thank you so much for joining us here at BLOCKTV. And for all our viewers at home, if you want more on blockchain and cryptocurrency news, check us out at blocktv.com.
more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.